Welcome. Wow, this is a nice crowd. It's great to have you here, Senator Jones. First time in Delaware?
Well, I'll wave when I'm on the train. We just, from the South, we just say, hey, y'all.
Yeah. Great. Any Alabama natives down in Alabama?
We got a couple.
It's very good. Got a few. Gulf Shores where?
Leeds. Charles Barkley's hometown.
How about that? We know Charles up here. Very good. It's honestly great to have you here. We have a lot to talk about your book, about the civil rights movement, about your time in the Senate, getting elected as a Democrat from Alabama, y'all. That's no joke.
I'm a unicorn. Really.
For Speaker of the House, what is going on?
That's a great question. It is one being asked across the country now. What the hell is going on? I mean, look, they kind of burn, in all candor, trying to not be political about this. Kevin McCarthy brought that on himself. Okay, he really brought it on himself. He's always wanted to be Speaker. He sold his soul to everybody, not just to the Matt Gaetz of the world, but he just sold it to everybody. Which means ultimately he was going to have some folks say, we can't trust you. Unfortunately for him, he had pretty much everybody saying, we can't trust you. And so he kind of brought this on himself with the one vote. I keep hearing all this yesterday, talking about the historic moment, the historic this. I'm getting tired of certain historic moments, whether it's a twice impeached president, an insurrection, 4 indictments, gag orders. Those are not historic moments that we want in this country. So let's get back to some sanity and let's make sure we get Joe Biden reelected. I'm sorry. I said I wasn't going to be political, but I am.
This is not exactly a hostile crowd.
I figured.
Speaking of hostile crowds, I should mention there are a number of elected officials in the room. We have City Council people, Michelle Harley, James Spadola. I know I'm going to miss someone. Representative Larry Lambert, Representative Kendra Johnson, of course, Senator Darius Brown, Senator Marie Pinckney, and Representative Cookie. I didn't forget you. Former Newcastle County Police Officer, now State Rep Franklin Cook, and of course, Representative Sister Marla Blunt. Talk about that. What? First of all, for me, you're a Democrat in Alabama. I think the first question a lot of people in this room ask when they decide to run for something is, can I win? Why even run for U.S. Senate?
Well, that's a great question. I get asked that all the time. But, there comes a time, even in states, that you don't really think you got a chance. And we knew we had a shot at winning, but we weren't sure that we could. But it was just time, I think, that somebody stepped up and said, I'm going to give a voice that people hadn't had a voice in a long time. Not even as candidates, they really just hadn't had those voices. And fortunately for me, my kids were out of the house, and I had a platform. I mean, I had a background where people, I think, could rally around. And that was the main thing, in giving that voice. But I'd always told folks, that asked me about running, I would say, look, one, do it for the right reason, not for yourself, because too many people do it just out of ego. And I said, do it for the right reason, because it's a public service. But second of all, don't go in there expecting or thinking this is going to be easy and you're going to win. But we need people to step up. We need people. We need good people to stand and step up and run for office, because even if you don't win, you're laying the groundwork for somebody else. Maybe yourself again, but certainly others. And I think that is one of the things that I think we're going to see in the South over the next few years. And we've started seeing it, I think, in my race. You started seeing it with Stacey Abrams in Georgia, John Ossoff and Raphael Warnock, Andy Beshear in Kentucky. You're going to see some changes, I think, coming out of the South because people are stepping up and people are saying, we're going to do this regardless of the outcome because we're going to make sure somebody down the road wins this.
I think every elected official has to sit and think at a point, am I just going to do what's popular, or am I going to do what I believe is right? You were serving as a Democratic U.S. Senator in a state where you knew it was among the reddest of red states, where Trump was more popular than in most states in the country. Yet you didn't, not to get political, you didn't play the Joe Manchin game, right? You didn't have a D by your name and play to the right. Can you talk a little bit about that decision and some of the individual decisions you made on bills, on impeachment, and things like
Sure.
that?
I told the staff, and it kind of goes back to the previous answer, in being who you are and being authentic. People can see unauthenticity a mile away, and they don't care. And the moment I started trying to play games with that, political games, people were going to see through it. And that was, I told the staff early on, my wife and I, we decided that, we would make sure that the campaign staff and then ultimately the Senate staff knew that we were going to look, we were going to take positions, we were going to research, we knew what our gut was telling us, but we wanted to be open to so many things. But at the end of the day, I didn't want somebody to tell me, well, Senator, candidate, you need to take this because that will help you get reelected or help you in the election. This is the political vote you need to take. My folks never did that. They absolutely never did it. They knew better than to do that because at the end of the day, I had to live with me and I had to live with my wife. And I knew that if I started moving away, I couldn't, that's just not me. I think you've got a couple of great U.S. senators, a member of Congress, a president of the United States who are the same way. They are where they are because they're authentic and they do what they believe to be the right thing. You don't always agree with them. But I've told the staff, I said, I want to be able to justify every vote I take in a non-political term. To talk to business leaders, to talk to civil rights groups, farmers, it doesn't matter. I want to be able to justify whatever I do in a non-political term. And I was able to do that. And, I knew it was going to be a tough re-elect, and we were prepared with that the whole 3 years. We were and accepted of the outcome. I didn't try to incite people to storm the Capitol after I lost that race. It was because I'd never looked back on any of the votes that I took. Well, there's a couple of people that I voted to confirm that I would probably take back. But substantive votes, I don't look back.
You voted to impeach, or you voted to convict the President of the United States,
yep,
who was at the time extremely popular among your constituents. Do you regret that?
No. It was the right vote to take. There is no question in my mind about it. We worked very hard on that. And if you remember, Speaker Pelosi had resisted those calls for so long. And then there was the whistleblower and the complaint that got made public. And I can remember being in Dallas, Texas that weekend on some fundraising receptions and reading all of this and seeing it and getting this feeling. And then all of a sudden on Monday, right as I'm about to fly back to D.C., I see in the Washington Post that about 7 or 8 more moderate members of the Democratic caucus who had resisted this, that would be in jeopardy in their reelection, that they had seen enough in that complaint to call for an impeachment inquiry. And I picked up the phone before we took off and I called my staff. I said, all right, let's get ready because it's coming. We're going to see it and I don't want to wait. I want to start following this. And we started building, and I'm an old trial lawyer. I've tried cases all over the country. And so we literally started building our file as if I was building a legal file with all the transcripts. I had people assigned, and we worked really hard. We built that file. We got all the documents coming our way. And during the trial itself, I took literally, folks, took over 400 pages of notes that I still have, color-coded, starred, you name it. And at the end of the day, it was not, I won't say it was an easy decision because we worked so hard to get to that point, but once it all got together in my head, I made a point, it was the right decision. I did one thing I'll tell you guys about, that right before we left, you remember it took about 3 weeks before the articles of impeachment to actually get over to the Senate. It was during Christmas, the holidays. And right before we left for the holidays, there had been so much publicity, and there were people in the Senate who had already said how they were going to vote. I didn't do that, and I truly had not made up my mind, but I got my staff together. And I got the top 6 people on my staff together, and I got 6 index cards. And on 3 I wrote guilty, and on 3 I wrote not guilty, and I randomly had them pick a card. I said, now I'm going to be gone for a week. I'm coming back next Monday. When I come back, I want you to argue the case as you know it today. And there were people that thought he was guilty that got not guilty. And there were people that were not guilty that thought he was guilty, you know. And it was an incredible exercise for the staff to go through and for me to hear the arguments where somebody just randomly was assigned to do something. And that helped distill some really good things for me to be looking for when that impeachment came over. So I don't have no regrets.
I'm glad you said there might be a county executive in Delaware who steals that idea. So, yeah, it's fantastic. Great leadership. I think a lot of people in this room are maybe a bit like me, in that we look around the country and wonder what's going on. You're from a place and served in a place where the majority of the voters, at least a lot of that, hey, what's going on? What do you think? You know, people are overwhelmingly supporting people like Representative Gates to go to Congress. What do you think is going on in our country?
Well, we're in a tough time, and I put a lot of the problems at the feet of gerrymandering, both Republicans and Democrats. I think that our Congress has gotten so gerrymandered where we don't have competitive districts. And if you think about it, when somebody like, let's look at both sides. Let's just don't single out Gates and Marjorie Taylor Greene. Look at AOC and others on the Democratic side. When you know that if you get your party's nomination, you have won the race, then in a competitive primary, you only have to appeal to 50% or less if it's a plurality state. A lot of states have that. We have runoffs in Alabama. You only have to appeal to a small segment of the voters in that district in order to win that primary. And if you win that primary, you're going to get elected, which means as you serve, you only have to appeal to those folks. You don't really represent all the people. And I really think gerrymandering is the biggest. It's one of the reasons I was pushing so hard on the Freedom to Vote Act and others that would try to get every state, force every state to go to nonpartisan commissions that draw these districts. I really think that is the biggest problem that has led to the partisanship that we have now. After that, it is very difficult to understand where people are going in cult-like fashions. And that's the way to say that in one sense. But we have moved so far in our partisanship when, let's another example. Think of, Brian Kemp. Brian Kemp's the governor of Georgia. Governor of Georgia and the Secretary of State did the right thing in the 2020 election. But now he will tell you he will do the right thing again. But he is also will support Donald Trump, who's been indicted in his county. He was called to testify at the grand jury. He will support him if he is the Republican nominee because he doesn't like the Democratic nominee. And that makes no sense. That makes no sense at all. We're in for some choppy waters going forward. We've got to, I'm worried about the third parties that are out there that are kicking around. That makes no sense to me either. But at the end of the day, I think that folks, if folks will start, we need to make sure people learn about civic engagement. And the folks that are here tonight, I don't think you're here just to hear a Democrat from the South. To some extent, you're all involved with civic engagement at the local levels. And that's what we really need to get people engaged in, is some civic engagement and respect for our institutions. The president talked about democracy the other day. That's what's on the ballot. It is always on the ballot, but never before it's on the ballot this time. And we've got to come back that, and we've got to teach our kids to be more civically engaged and involved in their communities, and making sure that they always put their communities, their state, their country ahead of any political party. And that's where we've got to go. And we've just got to do more of it. And we've got to see more people standing up and saying, even in the face of folks from their own political party that might be saying something different.
You, of course, are not just a U.S. Senator. You have a long, distinguished career as a lawyer, as a top-notch prosecutor. And you wrote a book about one of the most important cases, not only I imagine in your career, but really in the history of Alabama and probably our country.
Yeah, it was a pretty amazing case.
Yeah. Martin Luther King said the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. In fact, that helps us inform what you were just talking about with some of our challenges today. You chose to take the title of your book from that quote, bending towards justice. Can you talk about why you did that?
You know, it's a two-pronged issue for me. I think over the course of history of mankind, people have tended to be on the right side of history. I think at the end of the day, you see the ebbs and flows, and you see the aberrations throughout history. But at the end of the day, it always seems to bend toward the right side of history, to bend toward that justice, to bend toward right rather than wrong. But I firmly believe that it doesn't bend by itself, that it takes people like Martin Luther King and John Lewis and Abraham Lincoln and Franklin and so many, many, many others. And John Lewis wrote about this right before he died. People have to bend that arc toward justice. I think it takes the courage. I think it takes a lot of effort. I think in some cases it takes personal sacrifice of even death, like these 4 girls and others who died for a cause. But that's what I think, and that's the kind of the message, that ultimately the right side of history was going to prevail in these cases. I firmly believed it, but it took some really good, I think, lawyering. I get way too much credit for this, by the way. I had a team that was just second to none, including 2 top-notch investigators, and I think together we were able to bend toward justice, even if it was 37 and 38 years after that.
Well, yeah, why does it matter, 30, 40 years after a terrible tragedy, why does it matter to prosecute?
Well, because one, it is the rule of law, and number 2, you have families and communities that never felt that full measure of justice. You can't tell, and here's an interesting tidbit, and I can't remember, it's been so long since I've read my book. We tried 2 cases. We tried Tommy Blanton, and that case started in May of 2001. We tried Bobby Frank Cherry a year later in May of 2002. And before the Blanton case, we didn't get a lot of pushback from a lot of people about the case. It was overall, there were support, but it was kind of one of those things that they were very supportive, but at the same time they were also only cautiously optimistic. They didn't know, and they didn't really think we could ever get convictions. But there was some talk, why should we go back? Why should we go back and see fire hoses and dogs in Birmingham? We've long since gotten past that. We need to be looking forward, that sort of thing. And these guys have not committed any crimes. We just need to let that past lie and go forward. Well, an interesting thing happened between those two cases. 9/11. And after that, you didn't hear any more talk about why go back and not prosecute old terrorists. And that's what Cherry and Blanton and Chambliss and those guys were. They were domestic terrorists. And you did not hear that anymore after that, because people knew and understood that we may or may not ever catch the folks who flew those planes, who directed those planes to fly into the World Trade Center or to the Pentagon. And so there is no statute of limitations for murder in state courts around, and there's a reason for that. Because people that are victims of crime deserve to have their day in court if you can possibly do it. We understood the historical significance of the case, but at the same time, we approached that case like a murder case, which is exactly what it was, is a murder case.
So give us some context of the time. September 1963, Birmingham had experienced multiple bombings. Marches were using the 16th Street Baptist Church as an organizing location. Talk about sort of what, it wasn't just a bombing.
No, it wasn't. And it was, that bombing was long in the making. And we really, I was talking earlier about, we looked at not just our case files, but we read a lot about history and what was going on. Because, trials are stories. And you gotta put that context, even in a trial when you've got the evidence. So our context was really the things that were leading up to it. Birmingham had seen a bunch of bombings. Birmingham was known as Birmingham. But I think, and where we really studied this and saw so much racial violence at the time stemmed from school desegregation cases. 1954, Brown versus Board, separate schools are no longer equal schools. Desegregate with all deliberate speed. Well, that didn't happen. It took a lot of lawsuits. 1957, Fred Shuttlesworth, who is one of the unsung heroes of the civil rights movement that everyone needs to know more about, in Birmingham, decided he was going to enroll his children in an all-white high school. And they caught on film what happened to him, and he got beat up by a mob of white people. Some Klansmen probably in there, but they weren't dressed like Klan. It was just a mob of white men. And one of the people in that mob was Bobby Frank Cherry, who I would later prosecute. He didn't have any kids in that school, but felt compelled to violence to stop black kids and white kids from going to school together. And so all of a sudden, a piece of our puzzle comes in, because literally things that had happened in Birmingham, we had the Freedom Riders come through Birmingham. In 1961, Bull Connor, the infamous police commissioner, had kept his police officers away for 20 minutes so to allow the Klan to beat the Freedom Riders. John Lewis was on that bus and got beaten. Jim Zwerg, others. Bull Connor it was Mother's Day in 1961. And Bull Connor was asked why he didn't have police there, and he said they were all visiting their mothers for Sunday morning. And so when that happened, folks around the world, Birmingham became noticed with the Freedom Riders. And a group of businessmen were trying to change Birmingham. I'm going to make a very long story short. But Birmingham also was in the middle of changing their form of government. Bull Connor was going to run for mayor, and the city schools were going to be desegregated through legal action. A lawsuit that was filed right after Fred Shuttlesworth got beat up took 6 years, and it was finally resolved in August of 1963. In the spring of '63, we had seen the Children's Crusade. Dr. King had brought the movement, fire hoses and dogs, and arrest of these children. The world was aghast at what was going on in Birmingham. And more bombings happened because Birmingham was beginning to change, and the civil rights movement was growing. It was in June of 1963 that there was George Wallace stood at the schoolhouse door and blocked two kids, Vivian Malone and James Hood, from entering. He stepped aside. That was all staged. When he stepped aside, the Klan was not happy about that. And so they had more bombings. Which, by the way, just as a quick aside, I've told my folks in Alabama, I am tired of folks across the country, but particularly in Alabama, glorifying people who oppose stuff, like George Wallace or Tommy Tuberville. And we need to quit talking about the stand in the schoolhouse door and talk about Vivian and James Hood and call that the walk through the schoolhouse door, because that's the real courage of that event. I Have a Dream speech. The movement was growing in August, but there were more bombings in Birmingham. The Klan was seeing their segregated way of life sliding away. And then Birmingham schools are desegregated for the first time 5 days before this bomb. And what was going on, the church was going to have the children come back. The church had been a focal point for the movement, as you noted. So it was a target for the Klan. The children were a focal point of the movement. So they were a target. And on this September 15th, the church and the kids were coming back for a youth worship service. It was going to be the first of monthly youth worship service that Reverend John Cross had. So Birmingham was literally like a powder keg because of school desegregation. And I don't know if anybody was that surprised that something happened. I don't think they anticipated a bomb at a church between Sunday school and church that 4 young children, innocent children, died. But they knew something was about to happen.
Paul Robeson, W.B. Du Bois, Mary McLeod Bethune had all spoken. This wasn't just any church.
Right.
Is there any evidence the bombers knew the significance of what this church was targeted because of the symbolic importance?
There's really no evidence that these guys knew how to add 2 plus 2. Okay? Look, there is none about that. And even if they did, I don't think they cared. And it may have. They targeted this church because it was the place where the mass meetings were held. Dr. King had spoken there many times. Reverend Shuttlesworth, Jackie Robinson came and spoke there. So this was the symbol of the movement. The historical piece of that, they didn't care about. It was the moment that they were trying to destroy, and that's why they targeted this. And I am, for years, so many people had believed that this bomb didn't blow up at the right time. They thought it had been planted to blow up in the night when nobody was there and nobody was supposed to get hurt. There was some discussion about that in the 1977 trial, that it was some kind of fishing bobber water type thing and it didn't blow up. There was actually some evidence from Bobby Cherry, who we prosecuted, and Robert Chambliss, who was prosecuted in 77, that they made comments that it was not, nobody was supposed to get hurt. And an interesting thing happened for us because, we really didn't accept it, but we didn't reject that theory because it really, from a legal standpoint, it didn't matter. They were still guilty of murder. They put a bomb out there and somebody died, yet they were guilty of murder. So we didn't think about it that much. And I met with a group of black ministers right after Cherry and Blanton were arrested. Because, they were in their 60s and 70s at the time, and the judge under Alabama law was pretty much bound to give them some kind of bond. And they got out. And people weren't happy about that. And they were being very vocal about that, the ministers and black leaders. And I didn't blame them. But I also knew that as a lawyer, that if they got too vocal, that it could cause problems for me on a change of venue. And I wanted that case tried in Birmingham. I wanted to make sure our jury had not so made up their mind that we couldn't get a fair jury. So I met with them. We called a kind of a secret meeting. And we talked about it, and I got no real promises from them, but ultimately they toned it down through the trial. But the most important comment to me was Reverend Dr. Abraham Woods, who was a longtime activist and minister. And he asked me the question, do you think that the Klan had targeted folks to die or to be injured? And I gave him the standard historical thing. And he said he was very disappointed in that. which took me back a little bit because I had been kind of celebrated a little bit for just bringing the case. And I said, why? He said, well, Doug, if you look at your files and you remember, there was another bombing that happened about 3 weeks after the 16th Street bombing. And it was on a place called Center Street in the black neighborhood. And there were 2 bombs. One was a decoy, and people came out. And the second bomb had shrapnel in it, clearly designed to hurt people or to kill people. And his point to me was, we believed after all that had gone through, all the bombings in which nobody was injured, all of everything that had happened with the children's marches, the stand in the schoolhouse door, all of that, we believed that at this point the Klan was getting desperate and felt like that the only way they could make inroads to stop integration was for people to die. And I thought, okay. And that is the theory we adopted in our trial. It's the theory I adopted today. I met with Cherry, I met with Blanton, I met with all these Klansmen, trying to get them to cooperate, and I gave them that theory, and I said, now tell me where I'm wrong. And I couldn't get any of them to talk to me about it that I knew, like Cherry and Blanton and a couple others that I felt like had knowledge. I said, tell me where I'm wrong, and I will back off that theory. And they refused to do it, so to this day, I think that they targeted that church on a day when they knew the children were going to be there and that children would die. And I am going to take that to my grave because no one has proved to me otherwise.
I spent a year as a diplomat in Iraq, and that's what they did in Iraq.
Yeah.
They have a bomb decoy, draw everyone there to kill.
Absolutely.
Domestic terrorism. You've talked about Bobby Cherry, the last of the bombers. In the book, it talks about how he gave media statements that were his undoing, brought people forward. They brought people forward who'd known about this for years, who'd heard him bragging about it years earlier. Why do you think they came forward then, whereas for years before they didn't?
It was really, so Bobby Cherry was the kind of guy that every time he opened his mouth, he lied. Literally, I tell people, I would tell them something he said, and I said it was an absolute lie. And they would ask me, how do you know that? I said, well, his lips were moving. And over the years, he got very complacent and literally bragged about it. But the people that he bragged about it to were some family, including a wife, later an ex-wife. Wow. And I think it's at one point, he bragged about it in 1980 when he was living in Dallas, Texas, to a group that was cleaning the apartments. And I don't think people came forward. But number one, it was family. Number two, the wife that he bragged to left him and never had anything to do with him again. Didn't want to do anything. That's an interesting story about Willardine. I can tell you in a minute. The one that could have helped at the time was a young man who was friends with Cherry's son. His name was Birdwell. And he was asked that very question, why didn't you come forward? He was about 12 or 13. And he had testified that the week before the bombing, he was at the Cherry household. He had seen the Klan's robes that scared him. He had seen Cherry sitting around the kitchen table with some other white men talking about the bomb being ready, and talking about 16th Street, and asked why he didn't come forward. He said, man, I was a white kid in a Klansman's house. I was scared to death. And my parents, if I'd have told my parents, they would have never let me do anything. And so he just kept it quiet. And a couple of those witnesses actually thought that it was Bobby Cherry who had gone to prison instead of Bob Chambliss back in the 1970s. The ex-wife is a really crazy story. Now, I got to tell you, folks, when you're a lawyer doing cases like this, you got to work hard. You've got to spend the time. And we had an incredible team. But there's also got to be some luck or a higher power looking after you, okay? And we had it in this case. And two examples of that. One, when I was in law school, the first case was tried, and I watched from the balcony during closing arguments on a day that would have been one of these girls' birthdays. And the prosecutor used that as an argument, and it was so powerful. we started the Blanton case on a day that would have been Carol Robertson's 51st birthday. 51 years old, to have a mother testify about the death of a child is incredibly powerful. The second thing that happened with us, and I can't even remember where I was going now, was Willowdene. When I became U.S. Attorney, I sat down with the agents who'd been working the case for about a year, and we were going through what all they had done. Cherry had given his press conference. That's what you were referring to. He gave a press conference, and people started coming out of the woodwork, including his granddaughter. But they were telling me about his third wife, 3 out of 5 for Cherry, and true story. And they couldn't find her. They knew he had gotten married to this woman named Willowdene in the early 70s. They got divorced just 2 or 3 years later. They knew that they had moved to Chicago at one point. And then when they got back to Alabama, she just vanished. And they couldn't find her. And I was talking to them, and I said, well, tell me what you've done. And they said, well, we've looked at Social Security records, we've looked at death records. And I looked at the FBI and said, come on, guys, now you're the modern FBI. You telling me you can't find a 78-year-old woman in Alabama? And they just kind of hung their head. She saw a news article in a little town called Glendive in Montana, just a blurb, about reopening the case, and called the FBI in Bozeman and drove 200 miles and said, I know something about this. I was married to this guy. And talked about him bragging about where he planted the bomb at the church, a number of different things, introduced us to her brother. It was just a remarkable find with her. And she didn't like to fly, so I had to pay her mileage all the way from Montana to Alabama. But it was worth every dime of it, I can tell you.
I'm going to ask you one more question and open it up to the group here. So that's fine. Crap to you to start thinking. You recently called the bombing an open wound. Mm-hmm. We recently passed the 60th anniversary. Can you talk a little bit about that? Is this an open wound you're going to carry to your grave, and we're going to all have to carry to our grave?
Well, I don't know exactly which interview that might have been.
2019 NPR.
It was an open wound.
Thanks, Brian Cunningham.
I don't know if it is as open as it used to be, but it's still visible. And I think that's the key. I think I never used the word closure with regard. A lot of people did, that the verdicts brought closure to the families. And I said, no, things like this you never close. It's not closure, and you shouldn't close it. You should never, because that just gives credence to people who say, that's behind us and we need to not worry about it. Well, we need to always remember this church bombing and those little girls. We need to say their names. And we need to remember Emmett Till, and we need to remember, Goodman, Schwimmer, and Cheney. We need to remember all of those because they died because of the color of their skin. They died to get for rights that people have been dying for generations. And so I want to make sure that people understand that the justice that we were able to achieve put some salve on the wounds, made it feel a little bit better, but and maybe close the wound, but it's still a wound that you can see. There's still a scar, for sure, in Birmingham. There's still a scar in this country. And that's the one thing that I worry about with this country right now, that people are trying to look and say, well, you know what, those wounds and those scars really don't exist. Just don't pay any attention to those scars that are over here. And remember, there were people that learned skills when they got those scars. Just garbage stuff like this. And I worry that people don't understand or fully appreciate. And Justice Jackson said it best the other day. She spoke at the 60th anniversary. And she addressed that. And she essentially said, if we don't learn and study our mistakes, how will we ever know we made them? And I thought that was probably the most prolific statement about where we are today. If we don't ever learn them, how will we know we made them? And then we will be doomed to repeat them. And so I think that So the wound, the scar, but the justice is what I'll carry to my grave.
Thank you. And on the education piece, before we take you, Jamar's in the back along with Carl Shaw. You are in the Wilmington Public Library, which has been reinvented, reimagined under their leadership. Let's give them a round of applause. And thank you for being here to support our public library system. Question over here. Yeah, at the end. Tell me your name.
My name's Karen Carney. About 2 years ago, especially when all of the news surrounding the Voting Rights Act and what was going on, we had plenty of people up here in the north along where we live who said, you know, anybody can go and get ID and they can get all this, and this is, it's a farce. So my family's from Mobile, Alabama, and from New Orleans, so I had some history with my family, but my friend Marcia and I decided we wanted to see for ourselves. So we went from Nashville to Birmingham to Montgomery to Selma. Wow. And I guess it was a very emotional trip, I think, for the two of us, but for you, how do you reconcile all of the energy, the effort, the passion, the love that went into the work that you did and everyone else prior to? And when we were in Selma, nothing's there anymore except for this very kind of small contingency of families. And I have a friend who is living back in Birmingham with her father in Dynamite Hill. We were talking to her. And I just thought, I understand the trauma of a child seeing their parent, grandparent go through that and saying, I don't want any part of it. But how do you reconcile all the work that's been done to continue to have change?
Well, you know, first of all, the political leadership in Alabama over the last 20 years has completely neglected Selma and the Black Belt. You've had Terry Sewell, who is from Selma, who's our great member of Congress. She is out there every day pushing for Selma. People come to Selma, they look at the bridge, they leave. They'll come and march, and they'll look around, and they'll march, and they'll walk across the bridge, and then they leave. And Selma has got an incredible opportunity right now. It's another tragedy. Okay, we had a tornado that ripped through Selma and destroyed so much. And they are rebuilding, and they're getting more federal dollars. And there's a National Park Service Interpretive Center there. So I think the future of Selma is a little brighter than the past. But candidly, the state of Alabama has just neglected that area. It is, again, going back to gerrymandering in congressional district. We are so gerrymandered when it comes to our state House and state Senate that they don't get the money. I mean, you know, the money goes to Birmingham, money goes to Huntsville, money goes to Mobile, money goes to the Wiregrass, and a little bit will go to the Black Belt, and to Selma, and to Lowndes County, and those places. When I first got elected, I mean, look, the city of Selma is one thing. You go outside the city of Selma, and you go outside the city of Lounsboro and those places, it is literally, there is raw sewage pumping up in people's yards, okay? And that has been a health hazard. That's being addressed. We've done some things, but it is the lack of political leadership. Folks in Selma don't vote for this governor, and they didn't vote for the governor before her, and they didn't vote for the governor before that. And so it is got to change, and that's why people down there, we are fortunate that we may get another congressional district that has an opportunity to bring some voice to those folks. But so much has gone in, and there's so much that is, our director of tourism, Lee Centel, I met with Lee the other day. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson came to Alabama. She took almost that same tour. People don't know this yet. There's going to be an article about it because we kept it really quiet. She flew into Alabama with her husband on a Wednesday, and they didn't leave till the following Tuesday. Wow. And they did the same tours, and it was incredibly powerful. And if you want to do something moving, come and take that tour. Come to Alabama, come to Birmingham, see the Civil Rights Institute, see the church, see Bethel, go to Montgomery and see the lynching memorial. You know,
Brian Stevenson,
EJI. It is stunning. It's absolutely stunning. And if anybody, and that's what I keep telling folks around the country, For folks that want to bury that history, come to Alabama where we're celebrating.
That's right.
And celebrating it not with, confetti and stuff, not in that way, but we are talking about the good that came out of it. And there's still a lot more that needs to come because we're still, and folks, we're sliding backwards on race and everything else in this country. But so we still got a long ways to go. But thank you for coming. And there's still a lot of people dedicated to putting resources where they need to be.
Carl, we should have provided buses with this event. So we can walk right outside, get in, and get down to Alabama, all the way and back. Here, I'm going to run over there and give you the mic so we can hear you.
So I'm interested in going to law school, and I was just wondering, what was your biggest regret in your academic career? So like what's your biggest regret, and what tips do you have for law school?
Oh, I got so many regrets. I was not what I would call the best student in the world. Wasn't bad. I was good enough to get into law school. I'm not sure I could get in law school now. So, the one thing that I would say, if you're interested in law school, to get a really well-rounded education a little bit. I wish I had taken more literature and writing. I was a political science major. I wish I'd taken a few more business courses, just to see that. Law school education is one of the best educations going. It really is. I would encourage you to do it, even if you end up not practicing law. It is such a really great education. But I also tell would-be lawyers, just jump on the boat and hang on, because it is not easy to get in. People are looking at law school more and more. But I would try to make sure you continue to get those grades up, keep them up, and try to take as many different things as possible, because once you get to law school, the whole thing there is thinking outside the box a little bit. And I think too many, or at least, look, I was in college a long time ago, right after the Mayflower landed. I mean, it was, and I think college education today is a lot different than it was when I was in school. And I didn't have those seminar courses, and I didn't have a lot of those courses that really made you think and talk. They were just courses where a professor would spit off stuff, and you took notes, and then you took a test. So I think you've got a lot better shot at preparing yourself for law school. So the big thing is grades, and if they're still doing that LSAT test, do that. And the other thing I would say is this: people think that you got to get in a great law school in order to be successful. And a great law school will get you your first job. After that, you're on your own.
Yeah.
They don't call it practicing law for nothing.
Yeah.
It'll get you a good job, but a law school education is then what you make it after you get and pass the law. Okay? Good luck.
Good evening, Senator Tuberville. I have a question.
Whoa!
Oh, I'm sorry. See,
Oh my God! I think I need paramedics.
and Senator Joe, the reason I said that is because my question is, what do you and others in Alabama think about what that particular person is doing with military promotions?
I'm probably in an audience that has young people and mixed people, probably can't give you a full answer about what I think. I think folks right now are getting really disgusted with what he's doing. It will get overlooked by a lot of people in Alabama because he is a vote in the way that they want him to vote. Alabama has a tremendous amount of military assets in our state. We have as many, I think we're the 9th largest in terms of military population per capita, veterans, and they're pretty disgusting. I mean, they're pretty disgusting, and you can tell they are because so many people, when asked about it, they just kind of look at their shoes and shake their head. They don't want to talk about it. Unfortunately, it's not we don't have the kind of media in Alabama that some places do. And so I don't have the media pounding him every day, asking why he's doing this, talking to military families that are being affected, talking to veterans and what they think about it. We just don't have that. And so people see it on their phones, or they see it and it's just out of sight, out of their mind, and they'll shake their head. They've gotten used to shaking their head a lot, I think, about him. That they can't quite figure it out. I think the pressure is going to continue to mount, but it's not going to come from Alabama. It's going to come from Republican colleagues. That's where, because what he's doing right now will be an issue in the 24 election. Yeah. It will be an issue. I'm going to make damn sure that it's an issue in the 24 election. And I've told folks, I want to get people in these tough Senate races out there. I want the media to start asking whoever's running against John Tester what they think about it. I want these guys running against Sherrod Brown. Tell me what you think about what Tuberville's doing. Get them on record. Get them on record. Do you support Tommy Tuberville, or do you support our nation's military and national security? Because you can't support both. And so I think it's going to be a big issue, but and the pressure, though, I don't think will come from the state. They're just kind of out of sight, out of mind, and will tune it out.
Is it embarrassing when you turn on the TV and say, I lost to this guy?
It's embarrassing to see him, period. Look, we knew going in that no matter who won that primary, it was going to be difficult, if not almost impossible, to win in a presidential election year in Alabama. I knew that going in, and that's fine. I think people are now understanding what they got, that they voted for a party and they didn't vote for a person, and they're now seeing a little bit about what they got. I think there's a fair amount of buyer's remorse, but it's not because they would have voted for me. It's just they didn't vote for somebody else in the Republican primary. It's just that tribal in Alabama right now, and that's unfortunate. We're trying to break that a little bit with some good folks that we're looking to try to do some things. 26, but it's just not easy watching him, whether I lost or not, knowing that he is a senator who lives in Florida that represents Alabama and is doing the things he's doing is just beyond me.
Okay, we have two more questions, then we're going to conclude with our director.
Thank you. This is a question for both of you, since you're both politicians and attorneys. How do you deal with what is ethically right versus what the people that you serve want? And I think of that because I knew an attorney who was an excellent attorney, had a lot of awards, had a few books written, had a movie made, but he defended the KKK, right? And he didn't defend the KKK because he supported the message, but he supported free speech, and he had a lot of awards for that. So I'm just wondering, where do you make that divide in your professional career and your professional growth between what you need to do for the community, the people, and then ethically on your own balance?
You first. I don't have a mic.
That's what they all say. Look, I think there's a little bit difference between a lawyer and a public servant, okay? I think lawyers sometimes have to do things that they don't particularly like with clients because there is just a different thing that they may be defending. They're not really defending a person. They're defending free speech. They're defending something they believe in where the government is unfairly doing something and prosecuting or taking liberties they shouldn't have. So I do think there's a little bit of difference. I've defended, I was a prosecutor, but I also defended, folks. I defended drug dealers. I defended a couple of people that accused of murder. And the goal is to make sure that the state bears a burden before they can send somebody to prison. They should meet a burden. And I believe really strongly in the work of criminal defense lawyers who are liberty's last champions. To make the state or the federal government do their job. Because if we start letting that down, we're in a real problem. I think that's different for a public servant. Public servant is weighing. You are you're an elected official. You know that the voters voted you in, and you can vote you out. And unfortunately, voters make up their mind on headlines and different things. And I took the position that, look, I understand I'm not going, if we get to a position in this country where people are basing votes in the legislature on polling, then we don't need elections. We just need computers. And we just decide based on polling. And I thought, my job as a U.S. Senator is to do the work that the public's not doing, to get into the nitty-gritty, to learn everything I can, and to make a judgment, knowing that it may be different. But if I truly thought that it was in the best interest of the state, then that's what I was going to do. I think far too many people in public life make decisions based on polling without doing the work. And as much as I disagree a lot with Chris Christie, the former governor of New Jersey, he said something one time, I think it was at the Republican National Convention in 2012. He said, leaders don't follow polls. Leaders move polls. And I think that that's important to remember, you know. And it's difficult. I will tell you, it's not always easy when you've got a job, you've been elected to, you enjoy it, you would love to keep it. It's not always easy, but I think you just have to dig around and do what you believe is the right thing to do, knowing that the polls are just polls.
Ditto.
One, I want to say thank you for coming to Wilmington, Delaware. There was a fifth little girl.
Yes.
And there were also two boys who were killed. And what I wanted to know was, one, why were only 2 people prosecuted and not accessories? Because normally, when somebody commits a crime, we know that if you're in the scene or if you talk about it, you can be prosecuted. And why weren't those cases prosecuted?
Really, really great question. For folks that don't know the full story, there was a 5th little girl. She was injured. Sarah Collins Rudolph is still living in Alabama. She has a book out herself. She was the last witness in my trial, one of the most powerful witnesses I've ever had in a case, one of the most powerful witnesses I've ever seen. There were 2 young black men killed that afternoon, not in the bombing, but killed that afternoon. One was riding on he was like 14, I think, Virgil Ware. He was riding on the handlebars of his brother's bike. And 2 young teenagers, white boys, who had been to a Klan rally, came by and shot him in the chest and killed him. Now, they said that they weren't, that they didn't mean to. They were shooting at the dirt to scare him. But the fact is, he was shot in the chest and killed. They did prosecute those boys, but they prosecuted them in state court as juveniles, and so nothing really ever happened. And double jeopardy was then attacked. There was a second young man named Johnny Robinson. Johnny Robinson was causing a little disturbance with some of his buddies. They were throwing rocks at some buildings or something, and they called the police. And when the police got there, they ran. And Johnny Robinson was shot in the back by a police officer, unarmed. Police officer was never prosecuted. I can't answer one for that crime. I was only 9 when the bomb blew up, so I was 9 years old when that happened. The question about others, we looked at a lot of people, okay, for me. I looked at all the evidence gathered in the 1960s. A lot of people think that the cases weren't properly investigated in the 1960s by the FBI because of J. Edgar Hoover's reputation. They really did. The FBI spent an incredible amount of time and resources. It was the state of Alabama that was wasting time because this is a true story. The state of Alabama, George Wallace's people, and the local sheriffs and those people, they spent their time under the theory that it was other African Americans who bombed the church so as to help the civil rights cause. So that was complete waste. But the fact of the matter is, we had a lot of information from a lot of sources in the 1960s. I looked at every bit of it. But it was not information that would have ever been used at trial. Most of it was informants who refused to testify, including Bob Chambliss's wife and her sister. They were never going to have them testify and put their lives at risk. Other informants were pointing to Chambers, Cherry, and Blanton. And there were a couple others. I kind of think, from what I've seen, first of all, there was not a lot of evidence of too many other people actually involved in making the bomb and planning the bomb. A couple, 2 or 3 at the most. Where I think that the state and the feds let people down were the accomplices after the fact. Those that learned something, knew something that helped cover it up. But cover-up's a different issue. And by the time that we rolled around in 1997, when I became U.S. Attorney, most of those people were dead. And we still had a few that were still alive. We knew we were racing against time with folks. Now, I'll tell you, when I became U.S. Attorney, I'd done a lot of federal work, and I wanted to do this case. The staff in the U.S. Attorney's Office did not know my history of watching the case in 1977. I was friends with the McNair family. Chris McNair was a good friend. They didn't know all that, and they said, don't get your hopes up, Doug. This is an old case. The evidence is stale. People are dying. People are dead. And I said, if we don't do it now, it'll never get done. And we owe it to the community to at least give it a shot. And this is what happened. We worked hard. We lost a couple of potential witnesses while we were investigating to death. We tried 2 cases and got convictions of both. One of the key witnesses was a man named James Lay. James Lay's picture, I think, is in the book. James Lay was a black postal worker. Was riding around. He would leave his job and ride around the homes to try to protect the homes of the civil rights leaders and the preachers and the churches. 2 weeks before the bombing, he's riding by 16th Street at 1 o'clock in the morning, and he sees 2 white men. One by a car and the other standing over by the steps where the bombing was placed 2 weeks later. And he hits his bright lights, they take off. Long story short, he tells the FBI about it once the bomb exploded, and he picks out 2 people he thought that he saw. One was Robert Chambliss, who was prosecuted in 77. The other was Tommy Blanton, who I prosecuted. Well, 2 months before the Blanton trial, he's ready to testify. He's retired, he's older, he's soft-spoken, was going to be a great witness, remembered it all, was going to be a great witness for it. Well, 2 months before trial, he has a stroke. And he is paralyzed, and he can't speak. He testified at my grand jury and was an incredible witness, and I wanted this jury to see him. Well, we were going to bring him. We were going to bring him in by ambulance. And I was going to walk through his grand jury testimony and literally just ask him, you were under oath, was this testimony true? And get him to nod. Defense couldn't do much. We got in the middle of trial, and another critical agent, who was a former FBI guy, that Blanton had lied to. There's so many stories about this stuff, folks. I could go on for hours, and I won't. But this FBI agent interviewed Blanton 2 weeks after the bombing, and Blanton lied to him about where he had been. And then he got his alibi, his girlfriend, to help him. Well, that agent was coming up. He was a critical witness as well. And he ended up in intensive care 90 miles south of Birmingham. They thought he had heart failure. So here I am, folks, as a lawyer, as a prosecutor, and I got a star witness in a nursing home who's paralyzed, and one who had heart failure is in intensive care. That's why we couldn't get too much further. He ends up being okay. He ends up being fine. He comes and testifies. Did a great job, but I ended up reading, I didn't want to bring Mr. Lay. He was very weak. And so we ended up doing some things with the defense, and we read his testimony. Literally a month after the Blanton case was over. And I'd gone on vacation, and I come back and I pick up the newspaper and I see where Mr. Lay had died. Had that case got delayed another month, we'd have lost his testimony. And after those convictions, we had a series. Mrs. Robertson, the mother of Carol Robertson, we had an FBI agent who was the one who planted a really important listening device and caught on tape Blanton making admissions. He died. John Cross died. Mitch Burns, who was an informant, died. They all died within 6 months after these cases. When I'm telling you folks that God was watching out for us, he kept some people around just to make sure that the moral arc of the universe bent toward justice. So bottom line is, we would have loved to have made more cases. But the evidence wasn't there. And I don't know if it would have ever gotten there. And most of the folks had died. And I'm glad we got the 3 that we were able to.
Last question. Thank you. Thank you for being here, for making this possible. I have a question in general that will probably take a week for you to answer. Okay? But given that we're living in a political system where we are basically ruled by the tyranny of the minority, you have exactly, without going into all of it. When I think about the way the system is set up with the electoral college, gerrymandering, et cetera, what can you leave us with on 2 fronts? Okay? What is the most practical, pragmatic way for us as people in our communities to get involved to stop the madness? And B, and perhaps even more importantly, how can we stay informed without getting the bias of one network versus another? Obviously, I have my choices, and it ain't on the other guy's side. But I would ask you that, what can we do as citizens?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would, I agree with you. All of those things that you talked about are problems, and they need some fixing. We don't, we have survived for almost 250 years with a Constitution that has been able to be adapted. But right now, we're running into there where the minority really is. And if we don't do something, then it's going to be a bigger problem going forward. We're going to see more elections where the popular vote doesn't count anymore. We're going to see more and more Tommy Tubervilles and J.D. Vances blocking nominations and taking matters in their own hands. We got to tweak the Senate rules. I don't know if that means getting rid of the filibuster, but it needs some changes. For sure, it needs some changes. The Electoral College, in my view, needs to be changed, but it's going to take a constitutional amendment. And there is a pact right now going around where about 34, 35 states, including Delaware, have said, we're going to abide by the popular vote as opposed to just simply the vote in our states. So there's things that can be done, but it takes courage of people who are in office that are going to be putting their careers at risk by voting a certain way. And we don't have very many profiles in courage in Congress anymore. We just don't. People are really concerned about their next re-elect. You don't see a lot of people speaking out in the ways that I think we should to try to figure out how can the minority continue to have a voice, which is the way our Constitution was set up. Have a voice. Be able to help fashion policy and direction, but not a complete veto over everything. And so the thing I would say is to just stay involved in the local community. Gary Hart's got a great little book out about saving the American Republic. Just a small little book. And it goes back to trying to encourage people across this country to get engaged locally, at their local election, not screaming and hollering at people, but just get engaged civically, to try to start making sure people understand what civic engagement means. And I think that that's a really important piece, is getting and staying engaged. Because if you can do it in Delaware, it'll go to other places. It'll go to so many other places. And that's where I think we can do it. And demographics are shifting. Look what's happening in the South. The South is changing demographically. It's going to be a slow change. But we've got some real opportunities in the South to make changes that are going to help change the rest of the country. So we'll see. I wish I could give you a better answer, and I could be here for a week and not give you a full answer.
Okay, well, in closing, this is National Banned Books Week, and we're seeing books being banned at an alarming rate. And with you being, and one of the most banned books is To Kill a Mockingbird.
Yeah.
And with you being an Atticus Finch type, could you talk about the historical significance of To Kill a Mockingbird?
Yeah, no, it is the book that I try to read ever so often. And it is one about a South that could not do the right thing, but you had one person to stand up. And that to me is the lesson, is that, and Robert F. Kennedy said it, not Robert F. Kennedy Jr., his father, said one person who can stand up to oppression is like a pebble in a pond, and it goes out. And that's the answer here. We've got to continue to stand up, and we have got to look. I was having this conversation in my law firm. We represent, or have represented, the American Library Association on these issues about book banning. And we're going to start trying to help make that is another major threat that we're seeing here. And it's not that many people that are pushing this. It's not. But people are too afraid to stand up and speak out. We're seeing it across. So read. And sometimes get out of your comfort zone to read. Yeah. Get out of that and see what you do. Thank you. Thank you all.
Well, thank you, Mr. Meyer. Thank you, Senator Jones. Senator Jones will be available to sign copies of his book, Bending Towards Justice. And since the book is out of print, we had to cannibalize as many copies as we could from Amazon. So we're not going to charge you for the books because some of the copies are used. So we just will request a very, nominal donation if you're inclined. So Senator Jones, if you could approach the book signing table.
Thank you all.
And thank you all for coming. And we'll see all you Dallas Cowboy fans tomorrow for Malcolm Jenkins.